You don't need ghosts to feel haunted. Sometimes all it takes is a neighbor who stares too long, a babysitter who whispers in the dark, a stranger outside your door standing too still for far too long. In tonight's video, I'll share 4 terrifying stories. Not of demons, not of monsters, but of people. People who watched, who followed, who waited. In story 1, a disabled man and his family are tormented by a neighbor who won't leave them alone no matter how many times he's arrested. In story 2, a group of teens sneak into an abandoned pumpkin farm and awaken something that never left. In story 3, a young babysitter turns a sleepover into a quiet nightmare, one that could have ended very differently. And in story 4, the Purad family discovers what happens when the system fails to stop a stalker living just a few feet away. These aren't just stories, they're warnings. Because what's most terrifying is realizing that the person watching you from the shadows might not be a shadow at all. So lock your doors, check your windows, and whatever you do, don't ignore the feeling that someone is watching. Story 1. The Obsessed Stalker, a neighbor's endless nightmare. Have you ever lived next to someone who made you feel unsafe in your own home? This story isn't about ghosts or demons. It's about a man, a very real man whose obsession crossed every line and whose madness wasn't just frightening. It was relentless. The victim was a disabled man named Stephen Purad. He lived quietly in a modest home, relying on the help of his niece and her family. They were close, and like most people, they just wanted peace, a safe place to live. But peace isn't something you get to keep when your neighbor is someone like Stephen Groves. Groves was 56. He lived right next door, and for reasons nobody could quite understand, he became obsessed with Stephen and his family. At first, it was small things. Weird stares across the fence, uncomfortable conversations that didn't make sense, the kind of behavior you chalk up to someone being off. But things escalated. Fast. Groves began stalking the house mostly at night. He would creep around the property, staring into windows. He'd leave strange objects near the front door, like a single glove, a small garden tool, or once a rusted spoon placed neatly on the welcome mat. The family assumed it was a prank, but deep down, they knew something wasn't right. Then the doorbell camera caught him. At 2:13 a.m., Groves was seen walking up to the front porch with a screwdriver. He unscrewed the security camera, stared directly into the lens, and smiled. A slow, vacant grin, not playful, not angry, just empty. In other videos, he's seen using a broomstick to smash the cameras. Once he even used a Sharpie to black out the lens, muttering something under his breath the whole time. He was arrested, taken to court, fitted with an ankle monitor. Did it stop him? No. He came back. He always came back. The police said their hands were tied. He hadn't physically harmed anyone yet. They called it non-violent trespassing. But try telling that to a family who had to sleep in shifts, keeping a baseball bat by the bed just in case the next time was the time. Groves ignored restraining orders. He disabled motion lights. He even climbed onto the roof once, trying to pry open a second-story window. It wasn't just about scaring them anymore. It felt like he was hunting something. Stephen's niece said she started dreaming about Groves. She'd wake up and check the cameras only to find that they had been ripped down again. One night, she swore she saw him standing in the backyard, shirtless, covered in dirt, just staring up at her bedroom window. And when the family moved out temporarily for safety, he left something behind. A note, folded and taped to their front door. It simply read, "Come back. We're not done." Groves was eventually institutionalized, but the damage had already been done. To this day, Stephen's niece keeps a replica of that note in a drawer, not as a souvenir, but as a warning. Because the scariest part wasn't the things he did. It was how easy it was for him to do them, over and over again. It's easy to feel like you're safe behind your walls, behind cameras, locked doors, and alarms. But safety is an illusion when the monster lives right next door. Story 2. The Whisper in the Abandoned Pumpkin Farm. There's something about abandoned places that draws people in. Maybe it's curiosity. Maybe it's the thrill of stepping somewhere we're not supposed to be. But sometimes, there's a reason those places are left behind. I grew up in a small town in Illinois, the kind of place where nothing ever really happens. But everyone in our area knew one thing. Don't go near the old pumpkin farm. They called it Farmer John's Land. It used to be a popular Halloween attraction, hay rides, corn maze, hot cider. But sometime in the late 90s, something happened. It shut down without explanation. And no one ever went back. At least, not until we did. It was a Friday in late October. Cold wind, gray skies, perfect for bad decisions. There were 4 of us, me, Brandon, Micah, and James. We were just bored high school kids looking for a scare. Someone brought up the farm, and of course we dared each other to go. You know how that goes. We rode our bikes out past the edge of town and down the dirt path that led to the farm. The entrance gate was barely standing. Beyond it, the cornfield stretched out like a sea of shadows. Tall dead stalks swaying in the breeze like they were whispering to each other. In the middle of the field stood a scarecrow, old, slumped over, missing half its face, and beneath it, nailed to a crooked post, was a wooden sign that read, "Do not enter the house." That should have been enough. But we laughed it off, pushed through the corn, and made our way to the farmhouse. The building was falling apart. Windows shattered, roof sagging, but the front door was still intact. James pushed it open. The smell hit us first like rotting wood and old wet hay. The floor creaked under our feet as we stepped inside. Paint peeled from the walls. Cobwebs hung like curtains. It felt like the house had been waiting. We split up. Stupid idea, I know. Brandon went upstairs. Micah checked the kitchen, and James and I took the hallway. There were 4 rooms, all empty except the last one. It was a child's bedroom. The walls were covered in faded cartoon wallpaper. A tiny bed sat in the corner, still made, but on the floor was a single dusty red ball. James said something like, "Creepy, huh?" Then he kicked the ball. It rolled slowly and stopped. Then a sound. From behind the closet door. Tap, tap, tap. 3 slow knocks. James froze. I whispered, "Is someone there?" No answer. Then suddenly the door creaked open just an inch. We didn't wait to find out what was behind it. We ran out into the hallway, and that's when we heard it. Thud, thud, thud. Heavy footsteps upstairs. Then the unmistakable sound of Brandon screaming. We bolted up the stairs, calling his name, but he wasn't there. The attic door was open. We hesitated, then climbed up. It was pitch black. Our flashlights swept across broken crates, old decorations. Then in the far corner we saw him. Brandon was standing there, facing the wall, not moving, not responding. I called his name again. He slowly turned his head and whispered. He told me not to leave. We grabbed him and ran. No one looked back. Not through the hallway. Not down the stairs. Not through the field. When we finally made it to the road, Brandon collapsed. He was shivering, pale, couldn't speak for hours. Later that night he texted us. Just one message. "Did you hear the whisper too?" None of us had. But he said someone spoke to him in that attic. Not a voice he recognized. A voice that called his name. That told him, "Stay. Stay and play." Brandon never talked about that night again. He moved away less than a year later. And me, I never rode past that pumpkin farm again. But sometimes when the wind is just right, you can still hear something faint, A soft whisper tangled in the rustling corn. Didn't get to play last night. Story 3. The Stranger in the Night. A babysitter's dark secret. Not all monsters live under your bed. Sometimes they're the ones your parents let into the house, the ones they trust. This happened when I was 8. My little sister was 5. It was the first time our parents left us alone overnight. They were going to a wedding out of town and hired a teenage babysitter named Nathan. He was 16, tall, thin, with messy brown hair and a quiet voice. At first glance, Nathan seemed harmless. He smiled politely, played video games with me, let us stay up late watching cartoons. He even cooked us mac and cheese. But by the second night, something about him started to feel off. It began with little things. We caught him staring not at the TV or us playing, but at my sister. Not like a big brother figure, but with this weird blank intensity. The kind that makes your stomach turn even if you don't know why. That night my sister and I fell asleep in our separate rooms, but I woke up around 1 a.m. At first I thought it was just a bad dream. Then I heard something. Creak, the sound of my bedroom door, slowly opening. I turned toward it, and standing there in the shadows was Nathan. No flashlight, no phone, just standing. I whispered, "What are you doing?" He didn't answer. He just stared. Then quietly he said, "It's okay. Go back to sleep." And he shut the door. My heart was pounding. I sat frozen in bed, clutching my blanket like armor. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next day I acted normal. I didn't tell him what I saw, but I refused to sleep in my own room that night. Instead, I asked to stay with my sister, told her I had a bad dream and wanted company. She smiled and said, "Okay." But again in the middle of the night, I woke up. This time the hallway light was off. It was pitch black. But I heard footsteps outside the room. Soft, slow, careful. Then a shadow moved across the crack at the bottom of the door. It stopped. We held our breath. Then came a soft whisper. "Are you both asleep?" My sister whimpered. I yelled, "Go away," as loud as I could. Heavy footsteps pounded down the hall, then silence. We stayed awake till dawn, holding each other, listening for any sound. When my parents returned the next morning, I begged them never to hire Nathan again. I didn't tell them the whole truth. I couldn't. How do you explain that kind of fear at 8 years old? That sense of knowing something was deeply, dangerously wrong. Years passed. Nathan eventually moved out of town, but the memories stayed. And one night as a teenager, I looked him up out of curiosity. What I found: 2 arrest records. One for breaking and entering, the other for inappropriate contact with a minor. I stared at that screen for a long time. Suddenly, everything made sense. Those stares, those whispers, those nights of him wandering the house while we slept. He wasn't just a babysitter. He was a predator. And the scariest part, we never really knew what his plan was. What could have happened if I hadn't woken up? If I hadn't yelled? If we hadn't locked the door? It could have been so much worse. Sometimes people ask, "What's the scariest thing that ever happened to you?" And the truth is, it wasn't a ghost. It wasn't a creature in the woods. It was the feeling of lying in the dark, knowing that someone was standing just outside your door. Someone you were supposed to trust, and realizing you were never really safe. Story 4. The Deranged Neighbor and the Endless. Fear of being watched. Have you ever had that gut feeling like someone was staring at you from just beyond the curtain? That eerie sensation that you were being watched even inside your own home. For the Purad family, that feeling wasn't just a passing fear. It was a living, breathing nightmare. with a name. Stephen Groves. He was 56 years old. A neighbor. A man who on the surface looked like anyone else on the street. But behind closed doors, he was unraveling. And for nearly 2 years he made the lives of the family next door, a disabled man named Stephen Purad, and his caretaker niece, a living hell. It started with small things. Trash thrown over the fence. Late night yelling. The kind of things you chalk up to a weird neighbor. But then the footage started. Doorbell cameras began capturing Stephen Groves creeping up to their front door in the middle of the night, unscrewing the camera wiring with a screwdriver. Or worse, staring directly into the lens with wide, unblinking eyes before scribbling over it with a marker, or smashing it with a hammer. No warning, no shame. Just that dead-eyed stare full of rage and obsession. The family filed police reports. They got a restraining order. Groves was even forced to wear an ankle monitor and go through court-ordered rehab. But he always came back. He would find ways to get close, lurking in the yard, leaving threatening notes staring into their windows at night like some twisted ghost that refused to leave. The scariest part. The system couldn't stop him. Despite multiple arrests and clear video evidence, Groves always found a way to come back. To stalk. To intimidate. To remind the Purad family that no matter what protections they had, he was always just a few feet away. The niece, the one who took care of Mr. Purad, began sleeping with a baseball bat under her bed. She kept a panic button by her pillow. And still, she never felt safe. Because every night she'd lie awake wondering if tonight would be the night he snapped. That he'd go from smashing cameras to smashing windows. Or worse. And she wasn't wrong to fear it. Other doorbell camera footage from around the country shows just how close these encounters can get. In one case, a masked man knocked softly on a door asking to use the phone. The moment the homeowner cracked it open, he lunged with a gun. Another clip shows a man in a yellow hoodie holding a pistol standing completely still outside someone's home for over 5 minutes before silently walking away. How many times has something like this happened without being caught on tape? We like to think that our homes are safe, that 4 walls and a locked door can keep the world out. But people like Stephen Groves, they don't care about locks. They don't care about restraining orders. And they sure as hell don't care about your fear. Because for them, fear is the point. And that's what this story really is. A warning. A reminder that not all monsters are supernatural. Some of them live right next door, wave at you when you mow the lawn, smile at your kids as they ride their bikes. But behind that smile is something broken, something waiting. The Purad family eventually had to relocate. It wasn't fair. They were the victims, but they were the ones forced to leave. Because justice can't always protect you from the people who make terror their full-time job. So if you've got that strange neighbor, the one who watches a little too long, who walks a little too slowly past your house at night, who always seems to be outside when you come home, trust your instincts. Check your cameras, close your blinds, and most importantly, never ignore that feeling. Because sometimes what haunts you isn't a ghost. It's a person. We like to believe monsters wear masks, that they growl, crawl, or float. But the truth is, they smile, they wave, they live next door. They knock and say, hi. And sometimes, they babysit your kids. The stories you heard tonight, they're real. They don't end with the cops showing up. They don't end with justice. Sometimes they don't end at all. Because how do you forget someone who stared through your window at 3 a.m.? How do you feel safe again when a whisper in an attic tells you to stay and play? How do you go to sleep, knowing someone stood on the other side of your door and meant to open it? If these stories gave you chills, like, subscribe and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next real nightmare. And if you've ever had a moment, a knock, a stare, a feeling you still can't explain, tell us in the comments. Your story might be next. And until then, stay alert, trust your instincts, and remember, not all monsters hide under the bed. Some live right next door.